So this family was in West Palm Beach, Florida, okay, 1989, January 15th. They were approached by a film crew. Film crew came to their house, knocked on the door, and said, hey, look, we want to film a scene right here on your front lawn. Are you okay with that? And the scene was for, it was BL Stryker. It was before some of our days. Perhaps some of the leaders remember BL Stryker with Burt Reynolds? No? It was like a detective drama in the late 80s. And they came to the front door and they knocked on the door and they said, hey, can we film this scene on your front lawn? And the scene was, there was like explosions and there was cars crashing and all of that. And they said, yes, of course, we would love for this house to be, filmed in this show, right? Well, they get to the scene, they start doing it, and car parts are flying everywhere, and things are going on the front lawn, and the film crew gets a call. And they get a call from New York, and this person in New York says, what's going on down there? There's destruction happening. Turns out that was the owner of the house on the other line calling this film crew, because the people that were in the house weren't actually the owners of the house. They just gave permission to the film crew to essentially blow up the front yard and by any means necessary, do whatever you want, right? Because they were the tenants of this house. But they never asked the owner. The owner found out just by second chance, right? Secondhand figuring this out. Well, in life, right? God is the owner of the house, if you will, right? We are the ones who are given the resources, the house to be used. It's not our house. It's God's house. And sometimes we treat the resources, the house that God gives to us, in a way that these tenants did. They just said, yep, do whatever you want. I don't care. Frivolous type of mentality, right? An irresponsible type of mentality is sometimes how we approach these good provisions from God, these good gifts from God, these resources that God gives, forgetting that we're simply managers of those good gifts and resources. It's God who's the one that owns it, and he's given it to us to oversee them. It's not ours. They're not our resources to utilize. We ought to be managers of it. Because these are God's resources you are managing, you ought to strive for excellence in every area, knowing that one day you're going to have to stand before Christ and give an account for how you used the resources that God provided for you, how you stewarded the resources that God has given you. I think a helpful verse that perhaps you ought to commit to memory, perhaps you ought to reflect on a daily basis. When you think about stewardship, I want you to think about 1 Corinthians 10:31. 1 Corinthians 10:31 is kind of a springboard text, I think. It's a good standard for us to consider when we think about managing resources. How ought we to do that? 1 Corinthians 10:31, Paul tells us very clearly how we ought to do that. He says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do. So he's kind of like, hey, whatever you consume, but also everything else, do it all to the glory of God. That's a high standard. That ought to strike in your heart. Every single resource that you've been given from God ought to be utilized and managed to the glory of God. That's a high standard. You should strive for excellence in the way that you effectively manage God's gracious resources. This sermon, somewhat of part two, right? I mentioned that in the announcements. It's a part two of the first stewardship sermon of last time we were together. So that's why there's not a typo. That's why you saw 4, 5, 6 on the points, okay? So you were probably all guessing, betting, like, oh, did Pastor Roy make a typo? I did not. That was intentional. It's 1, 2, 3, right? 4, 5, 6. And if you remember the last sermon about stewardship, it was about stewarding like yourself well, right? Stewarding your mind, stewarding your body, stewarding your spirit. And today, we're going to talk about your resources that God has given you. Stewarding your money, stewarding your work, stewarding your time. That's what we're going to focus on this evening together. And starting first, I want you to focus in on how to steward your finances. So that's point number 1. Write it down this way. Facilitate your finances. Facilitate your finances. Remember when I bought my first car, I bought this... I was in sales at the time. I bought this little Mazda sedan. It was like a black Mazda sedan, and I liked it when I drove it, and I thought it was great. And I was in sales, right? So I was driving all the time. I was driving customer to customer. I quickly realized I hated this car. I hated it. I did not want this car anymore. It was hurting my back. The technology in the car was like really confusing. The Bluetooth didn't work. I think it was a great car. It just wasn't for me, right? Well, don't ever do this, by the way. This is also like part of the sermon. Don't do this. Facilitate your finances well. Don't do what I'm about to tell you. I took it back. And I said, this was 6 months down the road. And if you don't know anything about buying new cars, as soon as you drive off the lot, it depreciates like 20%. It's like, oh, we don't care, you drove it, sorry. So I brought it back 6 months later, and I wanted to trade it in for a different car. And I traded it in for the truck. That's the truck I currently drive. Been driving that car for a long time. But when I traded it in, what happens is you have to pay that car off, and the new car that you have. So my monthly payment was like an insane amount. It was like $650 or something like that a month, right? And as I was just new in my career, right, I wasn't making a lot of money, and that was a big hit for me financially. But I had to do it. Well, I didn't have to do it. I wanted to do it. I wanted to do it, right? That's kind of the point of the illustration. Like, you don't have to do it. I wanted to do it. It was a foolish decision. And really, just to push this even a layer deeper, is I didn't pay off that car loan until like 2 years into Kristen and my marriage, right? So that started to affect, that $600 a month payment started to affect our budget in our family, right? And it hindered other things that we could have done with those finances because I made a foolish decision when I was 23 years old or whatever it was when I started out in my career. So don't do that. Don't do that. That's a bad way to facilitate your finances. So I'm just giving you a good example of what not to do as I get to exhort you in many other ways. Just know that your pastor is right there alongside you making dumb decisions with their money, okay? Just I want to protect you from making those dumb decisions, if you will. I want you to think rightly about money. I really do. I want you to think about money because oftentimes money has this perception in the Christian mind that money is a bad thing. It's bad. Right? Because it's often misquoted, the passage that says money is the root of all evil. No, it's the love of money that is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy 6, write this down. 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. Let's see what Paul says about money. I just want you to see this. As for the rich in this present age, is he condemning the rich person? He's talking to the church in Ephesus. He's not condemning them. He says, charge them not to be boastful, haughty, is the word he uses, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God. So he's simply warning them. He's like, I know there's going to be rich Christians. That's a good thing. Rich Christians can do great things for the glory of God. They can get the gospel out to more people with the finances that they use if they're faithful to give, right? They can do so much with their money within the church or outside of the church. We should pray for more Christians to get more money because it would directly impact the mission of the church. So no, the money is not a problem, right? I want you to think rightly about this. It goes on. Don't focus on the riches, but focus on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, right? That's clear. Rich Christians should be willing to be generous, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life, the next life, the inheritance of the next life, right? So I bring you to this passage because I want you to see that money is not the end, right? It's a means to the end. That's what Paul's saying here. Money is a good thing. It can be used to further the gospel, it can be used to be doing all these good things for Christ, but it's not the end in itself. So if you have this mentality is I just got to work to get money and get promotions and get paychecks and all that, I want you to examine your motives a little bit. I want you to check yourself and see, okay, hey, why am I pursuing this? Are you pursuing a higher paycheck and a promotion so that you can give more to your church? That should be the mentality, that you can get the gospel out to more people, that you can effectively meet the needs of more people than you otherwise wouldn't have if you didn't make more money, right? That's the mentality that we ought to have with money in our lives. Don't idolize it. See it as a means to the end of getting the truth to people in the world, to meeting the needs of people in the world. So you think rightly about money. The way you do, the way that you practically work that out is you got to have a budget, right? So that's my first exhortation to you is I want you, if you don't have a actual budget where you write things down and you look at your expenses and you look at your income and you manage it, you're not being a good steward of your finances. When you're single, it's easy to think, well, I don't have other people relying upon my paycheck. I don't have other people relying upon my finances. I can kind of do what I want. For some of you, maybe you have more disposable income than others, and it's like, oh, it's just this time I'm single. I don't have to worry about it. But that's not the mentality of a good steward, right? I want you to consider having an actual budget, and your leaders, you can talk to me. Kristen was a CPA. She can help you with that, right? If you don't have one, let's talk about it, because that can be so helpful in you being a good steward. And let me just give you the bigger picture here for a second, because every dollar you get, again, whose dollar is that? It's not your dollar. It's God's dollar. God's sovereign over every single thing. Oh, but I worked really hard for it, Pastor Roy. Right? I worked really hard to get that promotion and that higher paycheck. Sure, within God's providence, he blessed you in that regard. Perhaps he blessed you with those gifts that put you different from the pack, where you got that pay raise or whatever. Like, that's God's money. You've just been given it to manage, and God can give and God can take it away. How are you going to be faithful with it? If you want to stick to your budget and you want to take dominion of every single dollar that comes into your bank account, you have to keep track of it. And that starts with a budget. You got to have a budget, right? Track those things. There's apps that do that. Every Dollar is a great app. You can utilize that. It's a great way to manage. There's other apps too. That was just one that we use, and I think it's great. But there's other apps that do that too. But have a budget. Have a system. It could be Excel. It could be paper. Doesn't matter. Have a system so that you know where your dollars are going, okay? Proverbs 21, verse 5. It says, the plans of the diligent, you'd be diligent to keep a budget, to maintain and manage, rather, your money. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty, right? Care about where your dollars are going. Next, if you have that budget, I want you then to think about, okay, some of you don't have debt. Some of you do. But you got to deal with debt. You got to deal with debt. If you want to be a good steward of your finances, and you think about this again, like in the future, when you think about becoming the right person to find the right one, you try to find the right one, you try to marry this gal or marry this guy, bringing in a whole bunch of debt into that marriage is usually not a good start to the marriage, right? So do what you can to deal with debt. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7, you've heard this quoted before. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender, right? It's not to say that debt is inherently sinful. This is the proverb. Remember, proverb it's not saying this is right, this is wrong necessarily all the time. Sometimes it's saying like this is a bad idea and this is a good idea. Sometimes it's saying this is right, this is wrong. This is not saying that having debt is inherently wrong, but it's saying it's not really a good idea to have debt. So I know that, some of you are at the cusp of your career. Some of you are still in school, putting yourself through school. You got different financial situations, but I just want to put that into your brain to know, like, hey, if you're going to get married someday, you don't want to bring all of these dollars of debt into that marriage, chip away at it. Do something about it. And if you're going to be a good steward of your debt, you got to know the interest, right? You got to know, like, where is your money going? How much principal are you paying? How much interest are you paying? Because you hear all the horror stories, right, of people then paying $500 a month for 20 years and they owe more than they owed when they first started, right? So you have to be, if you're going to be a good steward of your debt, you have to know how much you need to pay each month and how much you need to put forward to that to get rid of that. Don't keep debt until the day you die. Learn from this principle that you're a slave to that person. I just want you to imagine this. I'm going off on tangents. This is going to be way longer than I anticipated. Okay, I just want you to think about debt one step further. Like, you owe money to someone else. Think about debt. You're in debt to somebody, yet you're going to, fast food or something on the weekend, or you're going out with your friends on a Wednesday night or something, or you're spending this money that you don't necessarily have because you owe money. So you're essentially lying to that person, saying, "I'll get the money to you. I'm just going to spend all of it over here first, and I'll give you a couple cents." Are you following me on that analogy, right? It's like you owe someone else money, and you're going, it's like take your friend out who you owe $20 to, and you're like, oh, hey, I'll pay for you. Not your friend. I'm talking like you're paying for the friend you don't owe money to. It's like, I'll pay for you. And your friend's like, dude, you owe me $20. What do you mean you're going to pay for this person's meal? Right? That's kind of the idea that I want you to think about when you think about debt. Like you owe someone money, you have an obligation to that person to pay them back. Okay, so do what you need to do to chip away at your debt. It limits your ability to steward your finances well when you owe someone money. All right, what else can you do? Deal with debt. You create a budget. You deal with debt. Start saving money. Start saving money. I think even when you're in debt, and this is subjective, of course. I can't turn you to a verse on this, but even if you're in debt, like make it a habit of saving some money every month, right? Make it a habit of putting something away. It doesn't have to be a lot. If you're not in debt and you have more disposable income, you ought to really consider saving money, okay? Especially when you think, okay, I'm going to get married one day. You guys here, you're going to have to be the breadwinners of the house. You don't have to be, but you should be, as the Bible prescribes, I think, that you ought to be providing for your family, right? So you're not in debt, but you have no savings, right? You might be starting again at the cusp of your career, but you're late in your career, whatever. Have some level of savings for your family when you start that family. Ladies, you're not out of this either. You ought to be thinking about this in the same way because the Bible is to you as well. As you think of Proverbs 13, verse 22, it says, a good man and woman leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. Right? I love that. Like, think about that. The Bible it's pro leaving an inheritance to your family. And you're not even thinking that right now. Some of you guys, you're single, 23 up to 30, whatever. You're not even thinking about inheritance. But the Bible says you should be thinking about that. You should be thinking about that. Right? Invest if you have some money. I'm not saying do day trading or anything, but think of a high interest yield savings account or something. Right? Put some money into a CD. These are things where you're like, Pastor Roy, I don't care about this stuff. I don't either. But guess what? I need to. I need to care about this stuff. Because if I'm going to leave an inheritance to my kids, if I'm going to support my wife, I need to know these things, even though I've never been taught these things and I never cared about these things until late in life, honestly. But these are things that if you're going to steward your finances well, you need to at least know about them and care about them. You might not, this is not, for some of you, it's like, this is what I do on a Saturday night. As I look at the stocks and I try to invest, woohoo, yeah. For some of you, it's like, dude, I'd rather talk about snails racing or something. I do not care. That's me, but I need to know these things because I want to steward my finances well, and so should you. Start saving money. I have this here. So we got, right, think rightly about money. You got to create a budget. You got to deal with debt. You got to start saving money. I want you to think about this. I understand in the context of Southern California, Orange County, crazy expensive, whatever. So take this the way you will. But when you can, keywords, that key phrase, when you can, move out of mom and dad's house, right? When you can, okay? It's harder where we live. I totally get it. Sympathize with you, man. It is crazy expensive in Southern California. Find a roommate, right? Find multiple roommates, perhaps. Some of you guys are looking for roommates in this room. Find that person and live with them, right? I just think there's so much that you can learn about responsibility and discipline and adulting when you're not under the roof of mom and dad. And that's a great blessing for a lot of people that we have mom and dad that can help us at the beginning stages of our career and in our 20s, and but do what you can to get out from under their roof and be your own adult, your own person, okay? So important, especially when you start dating, right? This might ruffle some feathers, but you're dating someone, and because some of you are living at home, but that's usually not the best starting line when you're in a conversation on the first date is yeah, where do you live? With mom and dad. It's oh, you're how old are you, right? What do you do? It's why are you living at home, So I'm not knocking living at home with mom and dad. I hope you understand that. I just think it's important think it's important that you do what you can to get out from that situation. Start doing what you need to do as that single adult. Okay, lastly, you need to be generous with your money. If you're going to facilitate your finances well, be generous. God calls us to be generous with our money. I'm not preaching a prosperity gospel. This is not health and wealth. But the Bible is very positive about when you give, more will be given to you. When you're generous with your money, God will provide so that you can continue to be generous. The Bible is very positive about when you're generous with your money, He's going to supply those needs that you have. He's going to meet the needs. Like Randy Alcorn wrote a book, The Treasure Principle, and he's big on this. He's like, look, test God in this. It's like, give money away. Give more than you can away. And watch God use you as a tool in His tool belt to give even more. That's not like foolproof principle, right? But it is something that you should think about. It's like, am I being generous with my money? Am I giving to my church? Am I giving to meet needs of people around me? Am I thinking of money in this way where I want to earn it so that I can give it away? Because that should be the mentality. Being a good facilitator of your finances must include being generous with your money. 2 Corinthians 9 talks about that, right? But more so, I want to quote Mark 12 to you. I love this passage of that old woman in poverty, right, coming to the temple. Well, yeah, coming to bring her little coins. Mark chapter 12, verse 41, 44. Says, and he sat down, Jesus, opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums. Great, awesome, they were generous. And a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins. Small amount of money, which make a penny. Small. And he called his disciples and he said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. Jesus is not saying like those rich people didn't give or they didn't even give generously. He's just simply saying she gave more than she even had. For they all contribute out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on. Perhaps some of you are like, look, I'm in between jobs or I don't make that much money and I can't give to the church right now. Well, you're required to, right? I'll just say it plainly. Like, look at the generosity of this woman, the faithfulness of this woman to give out of her poverty. Like she had nothing, yet she gave something because she wanted to be faithful. And she knew that her money was going to do something bigger than what the money could do here, even in this earth. It's just, that's the mentality. Like this, be generous and the first thing, think rightly about your money, are so closely connected because your money should be a resource for spiritual purposes, for furthering spiritual things, for furthering the kingdom. And when you're generous, you have a direct connection to people getting saved. You have a direct connection of people getting fed that are hungry. You have a direct connection of ministry going out in communities and people getting sanctified. Like, you're paying for your spiritual growth. You're paying for souls to literally be taken out of hell and into heaven. Like, that's an amazing concept that you get to give to. So not only are we biblically commanded, but God gives us a great reason to give back to Him. I mean, it's His money to begin with. To be generous. That's the last, imperative in this short, long first point. All right. Secondly, many of you work or are looking for work. God's providentially placed you in that occupation. It's all according to God's sovereign plan to have you where you are at right now in the workplace that you're working. And again, reflecting on 1 Corinthians 10:31, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. You ought to own that occupation that you're in. If you're in between jobs, whatever work you're doing, you ought to own that work, okay? So point number 2, I want you to own your occupation. Own your occupation. Work hard every day. I don't care if you love your job or hate your job. Work hard every day. You might be in a dead-end job. You might be where you don't want to be right now. Does not matter. Work hard every day. Colossians chapter 3, this is why you work hard. Colossians chapter 3. And in fact, this is why you can work hard in those bad situations in your occupation. This is why, right here, you can work hard, and it's easy to work hard. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Of course, you got a boss, you got a superior perhaps you own your own company, you're still subject to some people with your product or your service or whatever. But no, you're working for Christ. You're working for the Lord. Knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You're in that job that you don't like, or perhaps you're in that job that you love, and you're tempted to idolize it perhaps. Remember who you're working for. You're not working for yourself. You're not working for your boss. You're not working for the people around you. You're first primarily working for God. And all of those other parties get affected. When your focus is working for Christ, guess what? You're going to serve your boss really well. When your priority is, I'm going to make Christ glorified in my daily work, your employees are going to think you're the greatest employee of all time. Because you're not working for a paycheck. You're not working for the weekend. Get that mentality out of your head. Oh, it's Friday. Yeah, oh man, it's Monday. No, you should be excited because you get to work for God. Work is a good thing. Yes, is it part of the fall for men that, work is hard? Yeah, absolutely, right? But work is a blessing from God. Remember, Adam worked before the fall too. Right? He was tilling the fields, tilling the garden. He was caring for the garden. So work is not the product of the fall. It's the hardship that comes from work. That's the product of the fall. So work is a good thing. It's a blessing from God. Enjoy it and work for Christ. Another way you own your occupation, you work hard every day. And I just want you to think about this. If you're going to work hard every day and you're going to be faithful to your job, it's going to lead to you avoiding job hopping. Avoiding job hopping. This is a little bit of just like my opinion, but also I think there's some biblical truth behind this. Like if you're going to be faithful to the work that God has provided for you, avoid job hopping. And sometimes this mentality of like, oh, grass is greener, or I'm going to jump to this new job, or I'm going to jump to this new career, we can kind of justify it in our head or something, right? But oftentimes it comes from a heart of like discontent, like uncontentment. You're discontent with your job. It could come from a heart of pride, like, oh, they don't value me. It could come from a heart of greed, where it's like, well, someone else will pay me more. Right? It could be coming from a heart from that. You got to examine your motives of why you're leaving the job. And far too many people are leaving jobs way too fast. Way too fast. We got to be faithful to the work that God has providentially given you. Like, think spiritually about this. When you're in your role, like, there's people in that community that God wants you to reach with the gospel, that God wants you to affect as salt and light in a dark generation. Like, there's a purpose that you're there. It could be a trial, right? Your job might be terrible, and that's why you're looking somewhere else. It could be a trial. God's teaching you something. Learn from it. I'm just saying, look, like, if you're going to build a career and you're going to build finances and you're going to get out of debt and you're going to do these things well, in the first point, you ought to avoid going from job to job every year or career to career, or industry to industry. Find something that you're okay at and do it until you die. I mean, there's some wiggle room in that, of course, right? But that should almost be your mentality. It's like, let me find something that I kind of like and I'm kind of good at, and that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Seek counsel before you jump ship and move somewhere else. So quick to do it. We don't want to do that. All right. Own your occupation by working hard, by avoiding job hopping, and also by setting yourself apart from the field. Set yourself apart from the field. What do I mean by that? When you work hard, I mean, think about it as a Christian. You're a Christian. So you have a different standard of morality. You have a different way of living, okay, than the world around you. If you're doing what the Bible tells you to do as a Christian, you will inherently set yourself apart from the field. Because the people that are around you in your workplace don't have integrity. Many people are not that honest. Most people are focused on the wrong things, sinful things. Most people are focused on a paycheck selfishly. They're not working for the Lord. Who are they working for? They're working for themselves, right? So the way that you're going to set yourself apart from the field is not that hard. If you have integrity, if you're honest, if you work hard, if you show up, if you're faithful, if you're content with what you have, I'm not saying like don't get paid what you're worth. I'm just saying like if you're content, you don't push your boss and ask for more, whatever, you're setting yourself apart already from this generation that you live in. But the problem is some of you aren't even meeting that standard. And you need to. You need to get to that standard. But if you would just do that, if you would just work hard and work like a Christian in your workplace, if you were to strive for the best that you can do, strive for excellence, as 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, as we just, we keep reflecting back on, you're going to set yourself apart from this generation in your workplace. You will. Lastly, to own your occupation, don't be entitled. Don't be entitled. In other words, the way you're going to steward your job well and steward your job rightly really is more what this is about. Don't be entitled to think you're deserved a pay raise or you're deserved a promotion. Or, hey, if I just go to this next place, then they'll give me what I want. I've only been here a year and a half, but how dare they not promote me yet? Right? That type of mentality should never be in the mind of the Christian. That's not being a good steward of your job because you're being selfish, you're being prideful, you're thinking something that you don't deserve. We don't deserve anything, guys. Everything God gives us is a privilege, it's a blessing, it's a gift. Don't be entitled to think that you're owed something. You're going to set yourself apart, again, if you do that. When you work hard every day, again, the first point, I didn't even mean to do this, but the first A and D are work hard every day and don't be entitled, kind of like the first point, they work together really well, right? If you're going to work hard every day, if you're going to work hard for the glory of God, if you're going to go into your job and have the mentality of I'm doing this for Christ, you won't ever have to feel entitled because you will get the things that you're hoping for. Maybe not in abundance and maybe not the exact way that you want, but if you're working hard and you're setting yourself apart from the field, you're not going to have to worry about a promotion or a paycheck because most likely you're probably going to get it because you're going to be setting yourself apart from those that are around you. But again, some of us in this room are not even meeting that standard. And that ought to be in your mind. That should convict you a little bit. Am I working hard for the glory of God? Am I being faithful to the job that God has given me? Or am I looking around to something else? Am I setting myself apart or am I just kind of going through the motions? Am I being entitled thinking I'm owed something that I'm not? That should be the thought process as you go through thinking how to steward your occupation well. And just to connect this to your relationship, connect this to marriage, I understand, we'll talk about roles at a later date. Women, you have something different than guys, but guys, maybe this is more prevalent, but you guys are working right now, right? You're owning your occupation, that's gonna build discipline. That's gonna build faithfulness. That's gonna build perhaps even, point number one, finances that will help support your family, your husband, ladies, or men for your wife. That's gonna support your family in the future. So owning your occupation now has not only an effect right now, but later as well. Okay. The last resource God has given us is incredibly important. It's primarily because it's a finite resource, right? You can get more money. You can get a different job. You can get a better job. You can get a worse job, right? You can get 2 jobs. You can get 3 jobs. You can have no jobs. That's a bad idea. Don't do that. But this last resource is primarily important because it's a finite resource. And every day you have a set amount of time that you are given from God. Every single day. You can't earn more, right? You can only efficiently use it. You can only efficiently manage it. Point number 6. I kept saying 1 and 2. 4 and 5, right? Synonymous. Point number 6. Master your minutes. Master your minutes. There's an anecdote I've heard before I really appreciate. I want you to imagine that every single day you were deposited into your bank account in the morning $86,400. Okay? I want you to imagine that happened every single morning. And the only, caveat, I guess, I don't know what the word is, but the only caveat, that's what I'm going to use, is that, look, this money is gone at the end, at that night. Like your bank account zeroes out. So can't carry over to the next day. You only have $86,400. That's the deal that you've made with this person, okay? Would you not take every single dollar out of that account every single night? You would do, right? You would take every single, you're like, well, I know it burns up. Like, I can't carry it over. I'm going to take every single dollar out of this account every single day. You have 86,400 seconds every day. Can't get it back. Can't carry it over the next day, right? How are you going to use the time for the glory of God? How are you going to manage your time, right? Because everything eats away at it. Sleep eats away at it. Church eats away at it. Work eats away at it. Relationships eat away at it. Fellowship, everything. Eating food, all of this eats away at those 86,400 seconds that you have every single day. How are you going to use it? Are you going to manage it well, or are you going to manage it poorly? Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 and 16. It says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time. That's not talking about seconds, that's talking about seasons. It's talking about the season that you're in, making the best use of this season that you're in. But I still think there's a principle we can pull from this, because the days are evil, right? You have a limited amount of time, and they're against you. Time's against you, right? It's like every second that ticks, the closer you are to eternity. How are you going to use the time that God has given you on this earth for his glory? Because it's his resource. It's his resource he's given you. And we don't know, and that's the crazy thing about time, right? We don't know how much we're going to get. We know how much we get in a day, sure, but what if we die that day? What if something serious happens in our life and that time is just totally gone? How are you going to use that time? Because you're going to have to stand before Christ one day and give an account for what you've done. Time's a fleeting resource. And again, going back, 1 Corinthians 10:31, do all to the glory of God. Manage your time with excellence. Use every second intentionally. Maximize the time that you have. And being intentional with that time means you gotta put laziness to death. You gotta kill laziness. And just like, before I even get into that subpoint, thinking about that in a relationship, in a marriage, if you cannot kill laziness now, you're going to start affecting your spouse, you're going to affect your kids, you're going to affect your home life. Laziness is devastating, not only in your single life, but also in your spiritual life, your relationship with Jesus, and your future relationship with whoever you date and get married to. Laziness is devastating. There's zero excuse for Christians to be lazy. And if you're lazy, then repent and move forward, right? And maybe some practical things that will help you here. But you got to kill laziness. Proverbs chapter 26. Proverbs 26, verse 13 through 16, it says, the sluggard says, there is a lion in the road. There's a lion in the streets. As a door turns on its hinges, so does a sluggard on his bed. Right? The sluggard buries his hand in the dish and it wears him out to bring it back up to his mouth. It's just too much for me to put my hand down and take the spoon and bring it up to my mouth. It's too much for me. I can't do it. The sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. You know what that means? That means that when we're lazy, we make all the excuses in the world, all the justifications as to why I'm just tired today. I just haven't built that discipline yet. I'm just not really good in that regard, right? It does not matter. You got to be zealous for the Lord. Romans chapter 12, verse 11. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in the Spirit. Serve the Lord. Remember, you're doing all things for the glory of God. Laziness not only affects your time, but it affects every aspect of your life. Laziness is the exact opposite of good stewardship of your time. You got to kill laziness. Right? Some practical ways, I think, at least they work really great for me, but I think their proven method is use like a calendar, right? Use some type of log, like a data. It doesn't have to be a calendar. It could be like a sheet, like anything, to know where you're going to be, what you're going to do, and who you're doing it with, and for how long you're doing it, right? Oh, okay, well, I'm waking up you got to wake up earlier than you wake up, I'm sure. But wake up at a time in your mind that you know you need to wake up at. Wake up earlier. Yeah, I mean, think about it. Another tangent. When you wake up earlier and you train yourself to wake up earlier, that's literally like you putting money back into your bank account. Because you're like, I mean, unless your body needs the amount of time, like don't wake up after 4 hours of sleep. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, if you're sleeping for 10 hours, perhaps you sleep for 9 hours and use that whole hour that's given back to you, that whole 60 minutes that you can utilize for the glory of God, okay? So that's, again, being a good steward of your time is knowing how much sleep your body needs. Tangent ended, okay? Back to the point. Use a calendar. So what I mean is like log what you're doing. So 9 a.m. to 10, you're doing this, and 10 a.m. to 10:30, you're doing that, and 10:30 to 11, you're doing this, and then I'm having lunch, and then I'm doing that. The reason why I think that is so important is because if you stick to it, right, you got to stick to it, is because you know exactly what you're doing every day, and you have a plan for it, and you don't get distracted, and it guards you against laziness. Use a calendar, use some set of like reminders that says, hey, you got to do this, you have this task, that's how you're going to stay productive, and set goals for yourself. Set goals for you. Write goals down. Set those goals for yourself because time is the resource that you use to accomplish the things that you're trying to do. But if you have nothing set in your mind that you're going to accomplish, then it kind of gets fuzzy with how you use your time, right? Like if I have a goal of, like running 100 miles this year or something like that, right? I want to run 100 miles, okay? Well, if I don't have that in my mind and I'm just like, I'm going to run today. Oh, well, I'm tired. I don't want to run today. 52 weeks end and I've ran 3 times. You know what I mean? Like you have to have that goal in mind so that you know how you're going to get there, how to manage your time in order to achieve that goal. And this is good in a marriage relationship. It's like, I'm not just telling you this because this is helpful for the becoming the right person aspect. This is directly tied to your future relationship with the spouse. This is directly tied because you want to date and marry a great person. And someone who manages these things well, who facilitates their finances and owns their occupation and masters their minutes, that's the person that you want to marry, okay? And I think everyone in this room agrees that that's the reality. You want to marry someone like that. Okay, kill laziness. So be intentional, kill laziness. Minimize distractions. Minimize distractions. We literally live in a world where Satan is trying to steal every single moment you have because he knows that time is such a valuable resource. There's so much distractions in the world that we live in, and they're all seeking to take your time away, to steal your time. And you just think about social media. How often are you using social media? How much time is being wasted scrolling through the reels on Instagram? And I'm not saying you can't use this as like a relaxation method or whatever, right? Like you can spend some time just being silly or whatever. But like you ought to know how much time you're spending on those programs. You ought to know how much time you're watching TV on streaming platforms or watching movies on those platforms or whatever it may be. You ought to know exactly how much time is being utilized and not let it slip away because that's a type of activity that where it's just draining, like you'll lose all the time. Like you just blink it in an eye and it's gone because that's what they're intended to do. These social media apps are literally wired for your brain, which they know your brain is wired in that way, to steal time away from you, to get you addicted to it. This might ruffle some feathers. I'm going to be a little bit more hard on this, just as a pastoral wisdom. I think you got to throw out your Xbox. I think you got to throw out your PlayStation. I think you got to throw out your gaming computer, right? That's just my pastoral wisdom. That's not necessarily I can't bring you to a Bible verse that says that, guys. I can't. But I'm just saying that there is so much better uses of your time than spending time on the video game. Guys, I used to play video games all the time. It was a major idol for me. I was spending countless hours, and just take it from someone who can relate really well to you in this. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. And look, if you're not going to get rid of it, then you need to do what we'll talk about later really well is you got to manage it, right? You got to manage it. Some of you aren't. It's not even intentional. It's just like, oh, I love to play video games. Let's do that. But you're missing so much valuable time when you're just spending so much time in the video games. Man, I wish I had more time to go into that, but I just that's just my pastoral wisdom to you. And like, you know, I know some of you gals play the video games, but most of you don't. I think more of the guys in the room play video games than the gals. And let me just do a consensus of the room. Ladies, do you want to marry a guy who is spending 6 hours on the video games on Saturday afternoon? 90% of them are shaking their head. Look, it's just, if you want to become the right person while you find the right one, use your time better, right? Use your time more wisely. Okay. Yeah, that one might, Proverbs 12:11, if I was to give you some passage to this that can help, Proverbs 12:11 says, whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. I guess you could redeem the video games. You could. You play with people. It's fellowship to a degree, right? It's relaxation. Great. But I don't think that's how everyone in this room is using video games. I'll just leave it there. You got to prioritize your time rightly. Where's your time going? How much is going towards entertainment? How much is going towards your spiritual growth? How much is going towards Christ? Like, if you're neglecting serving the church or neglecting your spiritual disciplines or neglecting prayer, you're neglecting fellowship, or you're neglecting ministry, are you utilizing your time wisely? Like, some of you guys might even be too overburdened that there's things that you need to get rid of in order to be better time managers. I would say it's more on the other side is that a lot of you guys have a lot of time. Perhaps this is the most time that you'll have in your life because you're going to get married. You're now splitting your time with another person. Then you're going to have little kids, and now you're splitting all your time with those little people. All of it goes to them. And that's a blessing and a great thing. Nelson agrees. But it is. It's a blessing. But this is probably the season of your life where you have the most time at your disposal that you'll ever have. Perhaps when but I was going to say when you're retired, but even then, if you're married, you got to split it with someone else, right? This is your time that you have to yourself. Use it in a big way, right? Don't, think about where your time is going. You got to prioritize rightly. Ensure the basics are established in your life. Those spiritual disciplines, serving the church, ministry, Christian relationships, make sure that those things are happening, right? Serve your church. If you're not serving, you need to be serving. If you're a Christian, you need to use your gifts to serve the church. Serve in some capacity. Some of you have the free time to even step up in more roles. Use your time in those ways. Don't spend it on frivolous things and silly things and time wasters. This is what I kept alluding to. Just lastly in this point, I want you to schedule your rest. So I don't want you to neglect rest. Being a good steward of your time means you ought to manage your rest time as well. So look, if you're going to ignore me about the video games, make sure it falls under this subpoint, is you're going to schedule that time and you're going to stick to that time. You're like, I'm only going to do it at this amount of time, and that's it, right? I would hope you'd throw it away. Don't throw it away, sell it. But I'd hope you do that, right? Point number 4, be a good facilitator of your finances, right? But, schedule your rest. God modeled this for us. You realize when you think about the Sabbath, when you think about the 7 days of creation, did God need to rest? Did God need to take a break? He was sweating a little bit. Oh man, it was so hard building the sun and the earth and all that. No, that's not how he's modeling the 6-day work week and the 7th-day rest. Now, in our culture, of course, we have the 2-day work week, which you could argue is probably not the right thing. Let's do 1-day work week. You guys are all like, please, no, I don't want to do that. Don't do 1-day work week. But God is modeling for us that there is a time of rest. Rest is a good thing, and you should schedule that rest. Our bodies need rest. Our minds need rest. So schedule that rest. Find a hobby that you like. Find an activity that you like, and schedule it into your calendar that you're going to use after this sermon, into the reminders that you're going to use after this sermon, right? Schedule that rest. Because if you're not intentional, schedule that rest, you're going to rest a lot more than you need to. If you don't schedule your rest, you're going to fall into the category of being lazy, not utilizing your time wisely. Schedule your rest. God cares about how you manage his resources. You should too. Right? You think about your money and your work and your time, and even just the last sermon, the last time we talked, your body, your mind, your spirit. You got to strive to manage those resources with excellence for the glory of God. That should be your primary goal. And thoughtfully consider those implications that it has, stewardship that is, on your future marriage, on a future relationship, preparing for marriage. What implication does this have on that? Remember, a crucial part of becoming the right person in your pursuit of the right one is stewarding God's resources in a way that brings him glory. Let's pray. God, thank you for this, of course, topical sermon, but I pray that it is helpful and encouraging and convicting perhaps and motivating, and I just pray that your Spirit be working through this, God. There's so much biblical principles that we can learn about stewardship. Pray that you provide good fruit from these small groups, that they are effective in applying the word and applying these truths, God, and this wisdom and some of this just pastoral insight. I just pray, God, that you be honored and glorified as always, and that these small groups in this time will be good. In Jesus' name, amen.